Hi, everybody. This is Caroline Leavitt. Welcome on this broilingly hot New York City day. It's disgusting outside. But anyway, I'm the co-founder of A Mighty Blaze, the initiative that began when the pandemic started to connect readers with writers, to interview writers, to help indie bookstores whose doors were shuttered. And we have a knockout book and a knockout author today. I should have asked you how to pronounce this. Akmaral?
Akmaral.
Akmaral, got it. This is fabulous. And you know why it's fabulous? Think about Amazons. Did you know there were real life Amazons centuries and centuries ago? This is a novel about them. It's so gorgeously immersive and so beautifully researched and written that it's amazing. It's absolutely amazing. So let me tell you about Judith Lindbergh, the incredible author of this. She is the author of The Thrall's Tale, which was an indie-bound book and a Borders Original Voices selection. She's the founding director of the Writer's Circle, a creative writing center based in New Jersey. Akmaral, I said it right, is set in 5th century BCE. It gets inside the heart and mind and life of Akmaral, an orphan female descended from Amazon warriors who's torn between ambition and love and protecting and leading her tribe, as well as protecting the one she loves. I find this book absolutely thrilling. It explores love, motherhood, women's so-called place, and also I think this book is so strikingly relevant for today. So let's hear some of the praise. Publishers Weekly called it a crackling novel and said readers will be thrilled. Christina Baker Klein called it a gripping saga, a love story, and a convincing portrait of a time and people lost to history. I want to tell everybody out there, first of all, I've made it so easy for you. I've put up a link where you can buy this book through bookshop.org, which we like at A Mighty Blaze, or your favorite indie or wherever books are sold. And also, I see Randy Trent is here from Indiana. Hi, Randy. And also, if you have any questions or comments, pop them in the chat, and I swear I'll get to them. So welcome, Judith. I'm so thrilled to have you here and so thrilled to talk about your amazing book. Thank you for being here.
My pleasure. It's always wonderful to see you, my friend.
We definitely are friends. So I wanted to say, please tell us the story of how this book came to be, which featured your young son. It's a fabulous story. I just love it.
I'm so glad you asked that first, because often people are like, it's the 5th century BC, and what does it have to do with modern life? And in fact,
it's everything to do with modern life. Everybody out there, just wait, you'll see.
So when I started this book, it was many years ago, and my kids were little. And my youngest was about 2 or 3 years old, and I had a habit of taking them into New York City every week to go to the Metropolitan Museum of Art. And we'd always pick a different gallery, and I'm, with my toddler and my little baby in the stroller. And one day we'd pick the medieval wing. And the minute my little baby boy saw those knights in shining armor with their beautiful, silver and feathered helmets and huge horses, for 2 years, he thought he was a knight.
I love it. I love it.
And the problem was, along with, he's got this crazy fantasy, which I have no problem at all with crazy fantasies, but I was the kind of mom who's like, well, I want everyone to be vegetarian and meditate with me and do yoga and gender neutral toys. And of course, he's out there battling with his brother with his Nerf swords, and the whole time my husband and I are in the backyard saying, no headshots, no headshots. So I was a little bit, dismayed by this whole obsession, and I had to figure out a way to cope with my little boy's quite natural and completely innocent sense of violence. He's a wonderful young man now. And so I basically turned the violence inward, and I was thinking, well, what would I fight and die for? And anyone listening who has kids knows the answer to that. Your kids. You would do it. Trust me. The mother bear thing is real.
It is real.
And I just basically found that, like any sane novelist, you work your life out through your writing. And I started discovering, there's research and things that came into the actual setting and so on of the book, but I started finding a context for that anxiety through my writing.
That's, you know what, I'm so glad you said that too, because for a long time, I guess it's still in the writing world, people have been saying, don't write about yourself. That's autofiction. Just, go out and experience the world. But the thing is, even if you go out and experience the world, as you have here, experiencing the path, I just want to show this gorgeous cover again.
Thank you.
It's still based on your emotions and your feelings and all that stuff. And there's so much in this book about mothers and sons and what we do for it. And it's just so thrilling and exciting. So I want to know, what did you know about writing historical fiction before you wrote it? And how did you find out that there were actual real Amazons? That's like the most cool thing ever.
Yeah, I agree. It's amazing. And since I started this, they found much more evidence that reinforces this fact, which is great. But I mean, my first novel, The Thrall's Tale, was about women in Viking Age Greenland. So deep historical research into places and times people don't know a lot about, that's kind of my jam. As my kids would say. And so when I started Akmaral, it really began with a Nova documentary about an ancient warrior burial that was found up in the Central Asian mountains. They're called the Altai Mountains, and they are in Mongolia and Kazakhstan and in southern Siberia. And this particular burial was found in southern Siberia. She's called the Siberian Ice Maiden.
That's one of my questions. I wanted to tell the story of the Siberian Ice Maiden.
Yeah. So she's absolutely extraordinary because she was buried in the permafrost, which meant that her body and all of her grave goods were perfectly preserved. And their documentary was partly about how they defrosted her without damaging everything that was in the burial.
Fascinating.
Yeah. You can still, I think it's on YouTube out there somewhere. But so as I'm watching this documentary and they're uncovering her, the feast that she was laid to rest with, and the gold and the bronze weapons and decorative arts, and she's laid to rest in this 8-foot-long larch wood coffin. And there's no wood in this place. It's a completely grassland up there in the mountains. So you're like, where did this wood come from?
Yeah, where did the wood come from? That's right.
And then she has this 3-foot-tall headdress, this crazy looking thing that you can see in reconstructions. And that's why the thing is 8 feet long, so that she had room for her headdress. And then isn't that amazing? And the headdress appears in the novel toward the end.
Yeah.
And the other thing, she was buried with 6 horses. So if you think of a horse as a Tesla, you get a sense of what an extraordinary sacrifice these horses really were, because they were not only transportation, but they were food, and they were clothing, and they were every part of the animal from life to death was a vital part of their survival. So this sacrifice was huge. So she was the one who got me started. And one of the archaeologists, one of the archaeologists on the documentary I eventually wrote to, and she was really fantastic and wrote to me and answered a ton of my questions. But her book was what led me to another burial, which is called the Izuk Gold Man.
Right. I was going to ask about that too.
Now, the Izuk Goldman was found back in the 60s in Kazakhstan, and the burial was not anywhere near as well preserved, but we had no DNA testing. So at the time, the guy was covered with these gold ornaments and another crazy tall headdress, and he had a sword and a dagger. So everyone assumed in the 1960s that, he's got weapons, he's got to be a guy. But
that's right. That's right.
Yeah, but later scholarship and a whole bunch of other things that I won't get into because I get very nerdy about my research. Basically, they suspect but cannot prove that this was actually a woman. And those 2 burials became the core of what became Akmaral.
I love that. Could they tell the age of these people?
They could definitely tell the age of the Siberian Ice Maiden. She died when she was about 29 years old.
29.
I know, I know.
What was the life expectancy then? Do you know? It probably wasn't more
It
than
was
30.
not very long.
Okay.
I mean, in the beginning of the book, I talk about there's a thing she says, the warrior's life does not last long because, first of all, it's a very difficult time and place to live in the huge open steppes, the grasslands of Central Asia. They're nomadic, they're traveling with their horses and herds up and down the mountains, and there's always danger around, not only from humans, which is of course the center of
Right,
the
right,
personal conflict and the human conflict, but wild animals. There's a big section of the book that has to do with a
right,
snow leopard attack, which,
right. That's right.
yeah,
That's right. That's right.
yeah. So they did not live very long, and many of the burials are from, teenagers and young adults, and life was harsh, short and harsh.
Really harsh and really fascinating. I wanted to know that after writing The Thrall's Tale, did that better prepare you to write this book in terms of historical research, or was it a totally different thing?
I think, in a lot of ways, the Thrall's Tale it wasn't easier, but it was more accessible because there were documents written and preserved from the time. Where in Akmaral, the only written history was from Herodotus, the Greek historian, and other people from the Greek milieu, but basically the only factual evidence was from Herodotus. And the Greeks had a lot of opinions about the Amazons. They thought that they were, very exotic and not the way women should behave. And also a lot of the things Herodotus wrote about the particular people that are my characters, he never actually went there. It was all hearsay.
Oh, okay.
So you had to kind of take it all with a grain of salt. So my work was really in archaeology to discover this world and these people. And I use the metaphor digging up the bones kind of almost
Right.
literally. I did not go and dig up the bones, but I might as well have, because I read a lot of very dry academic reports about burials and artifacts and, chronological testing and all kinds of cool stuff. But each piece that I found became an element that I made a
Mhm.
character out of and made an event out of. Like, there would be a beautiful
Tell us.
gold plaque, and I'd say, well, whose was this and why do they have this and who made it? And was it a reward for success in battle or something? And then a scene would come out of the story of the artifact.
That's incredible. I was just talking to the writer Clea Simon, who writes mysteries, and she was talking about the details.
Mm-hmm.
It's sometimes the details lead to stories, and you're always
Yeah.
looking for the important detail.
Yeah.
How did these Amazons die out? I mean, what happened? Was it just the men sort of pushed them out? Because there's a lot of that in this novel.
There is. I mean, from a research perspective, it does look like this period of my characters was a matriarchal culture, from the
Right.
way the women were the center of the burial, and a particular thing about the direction that the bodies were laid in relation to the sun, and all kinds of other things that seem to say that they were practicing matriarchal rule. Now, not long after, everything switches. So, although we don't have any written history to explain it, it does look like patriarchy sort of overwhelmed the world of what would have been the Amazons and their descendants.
Let's talk about the modern world for a minute, because it
Hmm.
seems like something very similar is happening, at least to my way of thinking. That,
Yeah.
we had this 70s, women made some strides, and then onward, and then we got Roe versus Wade, and
Mhm.
we got more and more, job getting paid as much as men, and all of a
Mhm.
sudden there's pressure to move back. And it's not
Yes.
just from men, it's also from women. And I'm trying to figure out, what was the why now point? What was it where, what was the why now point with the Amazons, where they just could not resist the men's power at pushing them back anymore, because I want to know, like, what's the why now point for us living today, where everything is tottering towards a Handmaid's Tale.
Oh, and I see that exact scenario, and it's very, very frightening. And the alarm bells are going off and have been for quite a while. If I look at history and I look at my own interpretation of the artifacts, because we don't have the history, and, I made a very conscious choice to make my story about the relationship between individuals and particular people.
All right.
But the truth of it is that at some point, the outside enters Akmaral's very insular, matriarchal clan. There are men in the group. It's not like there are no men, or else you'd have no kids and there'd be nothing. But eventually the outside comes in. And it's interesting because the outside comes in a form of a man that she falls in love with.
Right, from a different tribe. But what she doesn't understand until much later in their relationship is how he perceives the place of women. And at one point, he's like, they're sharing words, and she's trying to teach him her language. And he says, they talk about a particular object that's related to a weapon. And he's like, that's a man's thing. And she's never heard that before in her life. There's also there's still constraints put on women, even in this matriarchy. You have to kill before you can marry. You get to choose who you're married, which is interesting. The men don't get to choose, but you must kill before you can love. And I thought that was so fascinating and interesting.
Yeah, well, that particular thing is directly from Herodotus in his histories, chapter 4, something or other. It's at the beginning of the book. I have an excerpt. And I actually really wrestled with that, because if that were true, what would be the reason? Why would that, it's a terrible thing to ask of anyone. But the thought I had, and I extended it beyond the women have to kill, that everyone has to kill in order to marry. Because if you think about this small, vulnerable group of people surviving out on the steppes, and every day is a question of, will we have enough food? Will we have enough shelter? What if there's a storm? And if you're not willing to lay down your life to protect the group, then you don't have the right to add to its burden.
Right.
And that was sort of my way of coming to terms with that really difficult requirement from every person, not just the women, but the men as well. And it made sense.
It does make sense. So you've dedicated this book to all women who must fight to make peace. I wanted to know, in all of your research, do you know how women-led societies even begin?
I have lots of ideas of how a lot of things.
I'd love to hear them.
I don't know. I mean, I don't have evidence on this one. This one is more sort of how I understand the world. But I think if we go back to really ancient history, pre-Homo sapiens, when maybe our bodies did what they did and didn't understand the results of what, sex would create, that I think the reason why there are things like the Venus of Willendorf, that these fertility figures, is because they worship the female body. It could create life. But as men recognized that they had a different kind of power and maybe started to understand their biological strength in that sense, they started to shift their attitude toward worshiping the female form to utilizing the female form, and then basically enslaving the female form. That's my philosophy. That's my speculation. I'm not sure I love what I think about that. I mean, I have a lovely husband and 2 beautiful sons, and I have know nothing about the guys, but that's sort of what I sometimes think.
I wonder if it's embedded in our biology as a survival instinct from many, many years ago. Because I can't figure out why it seems there's this innate fear of women among many men, and just this myth that women are the weaker sex. And you
Mhm.
know what? They're not really. I
No.
mean, I always want to say to men, you try birthing a child,
Exactly.
see what kind of strength you have.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. Not only birthing it, but raising it and caring
Raising
for
it,
it and
that's
taking care
right.
of it. And I do think that, again, from a very ancient biological imperative, the most important thing, if our role in existence is to continue our race, our species, then
Right.
then the men had to go and protect the women so that they could take care of the kids. So I'm not sure that the way we express it in Western culture of the women are the weaker sex and they're, unable to do certain things because of that perception. I think it's sort of inside out. Like, no,
Right.
we're the most important thing because we
That's right.
can keep ourselves going.
Yep. That's
And
right.
men went out to fight the mammoths because maybe they were expendable. Sorry, guys. Love you. This is very black and white. I don't always say all this in public.
I want to know. Okay, I want to know, where did fact and fiction blur for you? I'd love to know like a few instances of what you embellished or what you completely made up.
So, because there is no historical plot, I made up all the actions, but the actions came out of the artifacts. So, for
Right.
example,
Right.
the first third of the book definitely deals directly with this idea that you have to kill before you can marry. And I don't want to spoil the story, but that was really where that narrative arc came from. But her relationships with her friends and her mentors and the leader of her clan, and eventually with the man she falls in love with, that all just came from her search. Akmaral's searching for an understanding of her place. And
Hmm.
at the beginning of the novel, she's a dutiful member of her culture. She does not question her obligation to become a warrior. She does not um, expect anything else. And one of her friends sort of is wondering why we do this and do we have to do this? And that starts to shift her understanding. And all the way through, she does not want to be a leader. She's not the sort of power hungry, bloodthirsty, I'm going out and killing the enemies. She is completely focused on protection
Right. That's right.
in the same way that a mother protects her children.
That's right. That's right.
So it's a microcosm of the family grown
Hmm.
to a small, not even a village, a tiny collection of families that travel together. And over time and through actually tremendous loss that she experiences and betrayal, she recognizes that there must be a better way than to constantly be fighting.
Yes. That's right. That's right. But we haven't found it yet.
No, because at the end of the book, and I'm not giving anything away
Right.
because at the beginning of the book, she's dying. So at the end of the book, she dies. But at the end of the book, the man who is her companion throughout her life, not her lover that she marries, but her companion throughout her
Right.
life, he's the one who takes her place, and he is bent on vengeance for her death. And that was
Yeah.
my way of saying, where is this going? And you're going back to, well, how did matriarchy shift to
Right.
patriarchy?
Right.
That
Right. Very
may be
easily.
just a kernel. Yeah, that may be just a kernel of an answer for you that I don't
Yeah.
know. I'd love to hear people out there who are scholars in this field and have more, maybe more cultural references than my own internal speculation as I'm evolving this story. But, that's what happens.
Okay, you have an audience question. It
Oh,
says, how do you write? Do you plot things out, or are you go by instinct?
so when I first began to write, which was a long time ago, I was an incredibly obsessive plotter because I'm very OCD. Everything has to be in
Me
order.
too. Me
Oh,
too. Me too.
good. See?
Good. Good. See,
Yeah.
that's why we're friends.
Yeah. But what I learned, and that book was terrible and never got published, and it will never be published because it was terrible. But what I learned was that if I plotted too much and then I would start writing and things wouldn't cooperate, because they don't cooperate when you're creating, I didn't leave myself any room to listen to the words and the story and the characters. So as I have matured as a writer, I've started to understand that I need anchor points. And I always think of it like if you have
That's
a map,
interesting.
if you have a map with cities and mountains and, various topography locations, but there are no roads. You have no clue how you're going to get from A to B, but you have to get there. So you kind of aim your mind in that direction, and you kind of know that's where you kind of want to land, and that gives you all the space you need, but it still gives you a direction that you don't get lost in. I admire people who just go by the seat of their pants, the pantsers out there. But I think also with archaeology and history, you need to hit certain plot points, or else you're not really writing history, you're writing fantasy. And I don't want to do that.
Right. Okay. What's the worst advice you've ever received, and what's the best?
The worst advice. Don't write about Scythians. That was a piece of advice that I got. And this book, the people of my characters are Amazons, but they're technically Scythians. And don't get me started, but I'm writing about Scythians, and I'm very happy I did that. That's definitely the worst advice I ever got. The best advice I ever got, I think it's just learning to not worry that the first draft is a disaster.
Oh, I'm happy to hear that.
Yeah. I mean, I think that OCD, that perfectionist nature in us, makes us very anxious. At least it makes me very anxious. I don't want to speak for anyone else, but it makes me incredibly anxious when I know it's a disaster. And I can't quite leave a section or a chapter unless it's in enough order that I feel like I can live with it. So I'm increasingly learning to allow it to be messy, but not to be obsessive about it. And so I think that is a real lesson I'm still struggling with. It takes me a very long time to write my books, and I wish I wrote faster. And part of it is the perfectionist thing, and a lot of it is that I write these complicated literary.
Yeah, when you do complicated, it's a lot. You said you had to embrace what you had previously shunned. And I want to ask about that. So tell us, what had you shunned and why, and how did you embrace it, and what happened once you did?
I think I was embracing violence. I'm still not a violent person. Thank you. I generally save insects that come inside my house.
That's like my husband.
Yeah. I mean, unless they're biting me, I think you have a right to defend yourself, which actually tracks directly with what Akmaral's life is. You have the right to defend yourself. But I don't believe in violence, and I believe in cooperation. I believe in trying to be kind and peaceful, and I so wanted my children to be that way. But I had to learn to embrace it. And again, going back to that first thing about my kids, I had to embrace this crazy, wild thing that is a boy. And I grew up in I have a brother, but it was very much my sister and my mom and I in our very female environment. And I was a ballet dancer. You can even see my point shoes up there.
Oh my God. So was I. Well, I wasn't good though. Really? I was terrible. Yeah, no, I was terrible. Terrible. Worst one in the class.
Oh, that's okay. But I was actually a professional dancer for 7 years.
Oh my God, that's so great.
Yeah, and those are my very last pair of point shoes that I couldn't just throw away. So I lived in a very female world, and ballet is a female world, no matter how many
it definitely is.
there are. And I just didn't understand the harshness and the directness, and the hitting is not necessarily violence to young boys. It's fun, and I'm so confused. So I just took my personal reality, that shunning of that violence. And I love my children. I've always, for the second they were existing, I loved them so desperately. And I had to embrace this part of them that felt really foreign to me. And so I embraced it in them, and then I embraced it in myself. Not so much that I've become violent, but that I'm strong.
That you're strong. Yeah.
And
I think that's important.
I'm fierce if I have to be. And I think we women have the right to be fierce.
I think we do too. You have
Mhm.
another question.
Hmm.
When did you retire from dancing?
Oh, goodness. Okay. Doing some math. I was about 24, 25.
Why did you retire? Was it just,
Oh, gosh. Well, lots of reasons. 24, 25 isn't that old for a dancer, but I had the wrong body type to be a dancer, and
really?
I'm very curvy.
Oh,
And I was, I had an eating disorder for a good 5 or 7 years, because that's what you do. If you
that's
wanna
what you do with
dance,
your
you
ballet.
starve
Yeah.
yourself. And even though I was starving myself, my body still didn't like it, and I went through a period where my body just was not cooperating, and I was getting heavy, and I couldn't face my figure in the mirror. So I stopped dancing professionally, and about 2 years later, I returned to what turned out to be one of the best ballet classes I ever had. That was filled with retired dancers, and we became the best of friends, and some of them are still very,
Oh,
very
I
much
love
my
that.
favorite
I
people on
love
the
that.
planet. Yeah.
So how
So
does writing, oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
Yes.
Sorry.
So, it's much better to be a dancer when you're retired, because you don't have to worry about it. It's like, "Oh, you're fat. Who cares?"
I'm sure you weren't. I'm sure like fat for someone who's not a ballerina is
Yeah.
probably very thin for everybody else.
Yeah.
So where did writing come in? Had you always written, or when you stopped, were you just thinking, well, what do I want to do now?
I always wrote,
You always
and
wrote.
I
Okay.
always wrote, and I used to say I'll write when I'm old, because I can only dance when I'm young, which is true. So
Which
at
is
about
true.
28, when I was in that ballet class, I started writing. Mostly, I was I was acting for a while, trying to maintain my performing life, and that wasn't going terribly well. And I ended up working temp jobs in New York City. And I was bored to death, and I was sitting there, and I had to look busy. So I was
Oh yeah.
so I was sitting there writing letters to my friends, and to actually putting them in envelopes with a stamp. And then when I got done with that, I'd be like, "Oh, I'll write a little poem, and then I'll write a little story." And then one story just kept growing and growing and growing. And then I was
What?
like, "Oh no, I'm writing a novel."
That's great.
Mhm.
That's great. Can you talk about what you're working on now, or are you superstitious where you don't want to, or
I am a little superstitious.
okay.
Years ago, not that superstitious, I'll tell you a little bit, but years ago, I studied with Madeline L'Engle, who wrote A Wrinkle in Time. She was one of my very first writing teachers. And she's like, "You shouldn't ever talk about it, because you'll never write it." And
Oh, that's
so,
interesting.
yeah, and it was an interesting perspective. So I'm a little cagey when I talk about my new works, but I do have 2 works that are in progress, and
Great.
somewhat, in a state of confusion, really, because one is super experimental, literary, fragmented, and nonlinear, and I love it, and I don't know if it makes any sense to anyone but me, but I'm really enjoying the process of not writing in in the traditional narrative form.
Right. Right.
And so I don't know if I'm ever gonna finish it, but I'm really enjoying that one. And, it has a lot to do with one of the most important things in my spirit, which is our planet and our relationship with it. And, so that's what that is. And then I have another piece that has it's historical fiction. You're gonna laugh. It probably, I haven't decided, probably gonna take place in the 1970s.
Oh, I think we talked about this. That's
Oh,
so funny. We did. We talked about this, I believe, or I talked about this with somebody. It's
I
so
know.
funny because, again, I'm writing a novel in the 80s, and people say, oh, it's historical fiction. I think, wait, I lived in the 80s.
Me too. I
It's
know.
like the 70s, too. I love the 70s. That's wonderful.
Yeah, no, so I'm not sure, and I'm still mostly focusing on discovering the characters, and there's a bunch of them, and I really like them, but it's a lot about women, aging, and relevance, which I
Yeah.
think, I have gray hair now. I used to have pitch black hair. And, the idea of women's relevance decreasing as they age, and our invisibility, I think,
Yeah.
is a really interesting question. And I don't intend to become invisible. I actually think I've gotten louder as I've gotten older,
Oh, yeah.
which
Oh,
I
yeah.
think is a good thing.
Oh,
Um, you know,
you
so,
have another question. What was your favorite part of the 1970s?
oh, totally the music. I still listen to the 70s.
Drugs?
I was a dancer. I didn't do a
Oh,
lot
you're
of
a
drugs.
dancer. That's right. Oh, that's true. That's true. The 70s were wild. The
Yeah, they
70s were
really were.
absolutely wild and wonderful.
The
But yeah,
great
the
thing about
music was
this
great.
the music is that, like, even my kids think 70s music is cool, and I said, "Yeah, it is,
That's
it
right.
is."
You know what else was great about the 70s?
Mhm.
Everything was so affordable in New York City. you,
I
you could
can
have your
only
own apartment and be
I
able to afford it.
I know. Nothing is affordable anymore.
No, no, it is not.
Mhm.
So I always ask people, because I'm an obsessive person, what's obsessing you now and why?
Ah. What's obsessing me now is a lot of the political stuff that's going on,
Yes. Yep.
both women's rights and the larger political situation, and what and also, as I said earlier, the planet. We're so
I know.
focused on the immediate and I trust me, I'm trying to pay my bills too, but the economics and the jobs and all of this. And yes, we all need to get through our day, but if there's no planet, there's no
That's
people.
right. That's right. There's no people. I know. I know. It's very, very scary.
Yeah.
Very scary. Oh, you have another comment?
Mhm.
All right. This is from Robin. As we age or get older, we seem to disappear, which is one cool thing some writers are including in their mysteries. Do you mean people actually disappearing? That would be like quite a sci-fi novel, but yeah, but we don't. I think that what Judith means and is that we shouldn't disappear. Just be
Yeah.
feisty, be fierce. Don't allow yourself to
Mhm.
vanish.
Yeah.
So I want to remind everybody that I put up the handy link for you so you can buy Judith's books. If you don't want to go through the comments to find the link, it's bookshop.org. It's really easy to remember, or you can just go to your favorite indie. I want to thank everybody so much for being here. I want to show this gorgeous cover again. I
Yeah.
love this book. I absolutely love this book. I think it's like, if you love historical novels, you'll love it. If you think, oh, historical novels aren't my thing, believe me, this is so contemporary in what it's talking about.
Mhm.
And, especially if you're female, if you're male, if you're whatever,
Mhm.
it's really an important book as well as a thrilling book.
Mhm.
So I want to thank everybody for being here, and I'll see you next week. And Judith, you stick around so I can talk to you, and we'll see you all next time. Bye.
Thank you, everyone.